The timing was horrific. 12 hours after Trump was declared winner of the presidential election, Germany's governing coalition collapsed. That means Germany is having elections on February 23rd. Extreme uncertainty has arrived extremely early. Full disclosure, I worked the last 5 years for the German embassy and ambassador here in Washington, D.C., but it doesn't take an expert to know that an unstable Germany has not been historically great for the world. To understand the unprecedented trouble for Germany's democracy, we need to look at the government that just collapsed, some recent and yes, pre-fascism history, and rising extremes splintering political power today. First, here's the collapse. November 6, 2024, Germans awoke to the news of a second Trump presidency. That evening, Chancellor Scholz announced he had dismissed his finance minister, Christian Lindner. Now, in parliamentary democracies around the world, dismissing a single cabinet official doesn't usually result in the collapse of an entire government coalition, but it did in Germany. Why? That would be because this was no ordinary cabinet member. Finance Minister Lindner is of a different political party, the Free Democratic Party, FDP, while Chancellor Scholz is of the Social Democratic Party, SPD. After elections in 2021, Scholz's Social Democrats, Lindner's Free Democrats, and a third party, the Greens, joined in an uncomfortable alliance to form a majority in Germany's parliament, the Bundestag, and thus to govern Germany. We'll get to why a three-party coalition was such a brutal challenge. But before that, the coalition ended when Chancellor Scholz fired his finance minister. Lindner left and took other Free Democratic Party cabinet members with him. Without the Free Democrats in coalition, Chancellor Scholz could no longer rely on FDP votes to wield a majority in the Bundestag. Therefore, Germany is having elections, even though an election was not originally scheduled until September 2025. Now, elections are part of democracy, so you might be objecting already. Isn't this normal? Governing coalitions end in parliamentary democracies all the time. What's the big deal? Have an election, new government, move on. That's how it works. An election is a mechanism of the system. How could that possibly be a crisis? And the good faith response to this objection is, maybe. Taken in isolation, of course, an election is just a normal procedure of democracy, but Germany's democracy is still young, arising from the moral catastrophe and destruction in World War II. And the three-party coalition that just collapsed was a unique arrangement for this young democracy. It was the first and only formal three-party coalition in the history of the Federal Republic, built out of uncomfortable necessity. So why did it form, and why is its collapse such a poor omen? Legend has it Henry Kissinger once quipped, "Who do I call if I want to call Europe?" For a time spanning the presidencies of George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, this person was German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Merkel was Chancellor from 2005 to 2021. During her 16 years in power, she became the face of an influential Germany, the economy at the heart of the European Union. And in September of 2021, Germany held a federal election to elect a new parliament, Bundestag, and by extension, Merkel's replacement. Who would emerge the clear winner, the new force to stand tall for Germany domestically and on the international stage? Nobody. No one. To be clear, there was technically a winner of the 2021 German election. The Social Democratic Party, led by Olaf Scholz, received the most votes, but the most votes weren't that many in total, amounting to 25-ish% for Scholz and the SPD. For reference, in elections since 2005, Merkel's Christian Democratic Union and sister party CSU received 35%, 35%, 41%, and 33%. So Scholz winning with only 25% was a significant drop. And that had consequences for forming a government. Taking Scholz's seats in parliament and adding a single junior partner, the Green Party for example, would not have been enough for a majority. Instead, as we've learned, Scholz sought a three-party coalition with the Green Party and the Free Democrats. Scholz's Social Democrats are traditionally center-left, so partnering with the Greens, represented by Annalena Baerbock and Robert Habeck, was a natural development. But adding a third party to get the necessary majority in parliament was the tricky bit. The third member of the coalition, Lindner and the FDP, is a group of the political right. When you hear the Free and Free Democratic Party, think free markets, laissez-faire economics, tight budgets, and low regulation. In order to convince this party of the right to join the coalition with two parties of the left, compromise was necessary. And the three parties did indeed find a way. They signed a Koalitionsvertrag, coalition agreement, on December 7th, 2021, posed for awkward photo ops, and were sworn in the next day. They promised Fortschritt, progress, also freedom, justice, and sustainability. In retrospect, a cynic might say the only thing these parties really had in common was a desire for the power to govern. A more positive portrayal that all three maintain to this day is that they had a sincere desire to try to make it work in the post-Merkel era on behalf of a stable, democratic Germany. If they didn't at least try, it would have fed into the narrative of an intransigent, dysfunctional establishment, the core of the message of right-wing newcomers, Alternative for Germany, AfD. By the way, we'll learn how now that the coalition has indeed collapsed, the AfD see themselves as beneficiaries. Various crises cascaded on the coalition's desk within months. Most notably, Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. Energy prices soared as Germans weaned themselves off Russian oil imports. Then the economy stalled. In November 2023, Germany's Federal Constitutional Court deemed a critical part of a government budget illegal. And finally, a year later, Donald Trump was re-elected, implying tariffs for Germany and Europe and bumps in the road for NATO and Ukraine. Now, sometimes a crisis brings politicians of rival parties together. They set aside differences and rally around the flag, so to speak. But in Germany, the challenges of the day created the cracks in the coalition that ultimately brought about its downfall. To understand why the crises brought the parties further apart rather than closer together, we need to understand some uncomfortable history. I say uncomfortable because, I'm going to bring up Weimar Germany before its decline into fascism. I promise to reference the darkest moment in German history as responsibly as I can. But first, we need to understand how coalitions have worked in Germany since World War II. Since the founding of West Germany in 1949, nothing like this three-party coalition that just collapsed had occurred. The very first West German elections might be the closest comparison. The CDU-CSU under Konrad Adenauer formed a government with the Free Democratic Party and the German party, the Deutsche Partei, DP. CDU, FDP, DP, that's three parties. Heck, if you toss in the CSU, the CDU's sister party from Bavaria, you get four. That's technically a four-party coalition, right? But that's missing the point. These parties were closely aligned. In federal politics, for example, the CDU-CSU have functionally operated as a single center-right party into the present day. The German party, DP Deutsche Partei, would eventually fold into the CDU-CSU, and the Free Democrats were a pro-business party of the right. So all of these parties were ideologically adjacent, soon to be combined, or just plain related like siblings. The point is, in the short history of the Federal Republic, 1949 to today, coalition governments are usually the product of two main parties. So you get the Christian Democrats, CDU, working with the Free Democrats, FDP, or you get the Social Democrats working with the Greens, like in 1998. You even get grand coalitions of the largest parties, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats, like Merkel's final term in 2018. You can imagine the advantage. When only two parties are involved, there are two sets of interests to consider when you have a disagreement. So, two-party coalitions have been a more stable option for Germany over the years. But funny enough, the most prominent drama in two-party coalitions over the history of the Federal Republic has come when the Free Democratic Party has been involved, perhaps foreshadowing the drama we've just seen with Linde's FDP. In 1966, FDP members in coalition with the CDU resigned, collapsing the government. In 1982, SPD Chancellor Helmut Schmidt felt betrayed by FDP partners, so he ended that coalition. And so it is possible with this governing crisis that when we look back on the moment Chancellor Scholz fired Lindner, it will seem as irrelevant and distant as 1966 and 1982. And to give responsible coverage, it must be said that the results of the forthcoming German election might be decisive. Perhaps the main opposition party, the CDU, will win a substantial plurality, easily form a coalition with another junior partner, two-party coalition, just like Germans are accustomed to over the years. Crisis averted. People like me were hyperventilating. And it's also completely possible, and backed up by polling data as of the writing of this video, that a two-party coalition of the past will be mathematically impossible, especially because all mainstream parties have ruled out working with the alternative for Germany. So it's possible that a three-party coalition will be needed again, the winner of the most votes, and then two junior partners. And that comes with all the drama, posturing, ideological differences, and potential for sudden collapse like we just saw. Therefore, responsible coverage requires us to look at one more uncomfortable historical comparison, with plenty of caveats. That historical comparison predates World War II and the Federal Republic of Germany. That historical parallel is found in the Weimar Republic, the German republic that existed between World War I and the rise of the so-called Third Reich. Part, and I emphasize part, of the reason this original German attempt at democracy failed was because of unstable coalition governance. Political dysfunction brought about the May 1928 elections, and so, kind of like today, no one was particularly enthused. No one except radical parties, the Communists and the National Socialists. Both vowed to kill Germany's Weimar Republic were they to win. But a mainstream party, Hermann Müller and his Social Democrats, won the most votes and the most seats in 1928. And in general, parties of the left outperformed parties of the right. However, the vote was so splintered that a simple two-party coalition was not possible. To form a government, Müller needed to cobble together 5 different parties making up a grand coalition. These parties were of the left and the center. In fact, one of the parties was literally named the Center Party, and it was unstable. The 1928 multi-party coalition fell apart after a year and 9 months. The next elections in 1930 produced no functioning coalition, and you'll notice the page on Wikipedia, yes, Wikipedia, the greatest work of intellectual altruism in human history, begins to feature this guy as of 1930. Because the 1930 elections were a mess, more elections came early in July 1932. And for the first time, the National Socialists won the most votes and the most seats, though the fascists were still unable to form a government. So more elections 4 months later in November 1932. Now at this point, Adolf Hitler was able to form a governing coalition, after which he immediately called for, you guessed it, more elections to solidify his so-called Machtergreifung, which translates to grip of power. And we know the rest of the story for Germany's attempt at democracy between World Wars I and II. Now, a professional editor might tell me not to dwell here with caveats and but I do feel a responsibility to you. First, it would be fallacious to claim that Hitler took power exclusively on the premise of tumultuous and numerous elections. Irresponsible. Nonetheless, political instability certainly helped extremists in the Weimar political system. More thorough explanation and sourcing in my video, The Rise of the Third Reich. Second, this comparison is not meant to draw personal parallels between political figures of that time and today. Last, the whole situation is not meant to be a one-to-one parallel to the present. Okay, but all that being said, I stand by the idea that one of the lessons of the Weimar period is that a splintered vote in a proportional system makes forming governing coalitions complicated. It's kind of anatomical. Coalitions formed in this way are more likely to lack ideological clarity, be prone to infighting, and therefore encourage instability. And democratic instability empowers narratives of those for whom democracy is an obstacle. That's my interpretation. And I'm not really out on a limb here. This is clearly part of the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times in Germany right now. It's clearly on the mind of German officials and thinkers. You often hear concern for Germany's demokratische Mitte, the democratic middle. It references the parties of the left and right that nonetheless share interest in defending Germany's constitution and democratic norms in the face of threats from extremes. For example, I've often heard FDP's Christian Lindner, remember the guy who got fired? I've often heard him refer to the responsibilities of the large democratic middle, the responsible middle against populism. Vice Chancellor Habeck of the Greens is worried about liberal democracy under pressure. The main opposition leader, Friedrich Merz, insists that the work of his CDU is not cooperation with populists, but competition among the middle. Even Chancellor Scholz said in interviews when discussing the difficulty of his three-party coalition, and I'm paraphrasing, that this is an important moment for Germany's democracy. Germans should prepare for more uncertainty, that awkward coalitions have existed at the state level in Germany for years, and that they will be more regularly seen at the national level in order to isolate extremists. Growing pains are not a reason to dismiss democratic parties, quote, the majority of the middle is much larger. But Scholz also said, while announcing the collapse of the government, that one potential consequence of all this was plunging the country into chaos. So now we come full circle and ask a simple question. What's next? Because when Chancellor Scholz fired his finance minister and thereby collapsed the governing coalition, he did it not in a sanitized, bureaucratic way. He made it clear it was a personal affair. He wasn't merely parting ways with a member of his cabinet who was of a different political party and whose disagreements compelled him to professionally cut ties. Oh no, he made it clear he was firing the man, Christian Lindner, who he claimed had broken agreements, trust, and staged performative ideological arguments for the short-term interest of his political party. Cohesion was jeopardized. It even, quote, jeopardizes our democracy. The firing of Christian Lindner and the press conference of Chancellor Scholz was an interpersonal spectacle. And it is no coincidence that as a campaign gets kicked off in this sort of chaotic disarray, as many I've heard called it unworthy infighting, it is no surprise that German voters are preferring parties of the far left and right with more regularity. One of those parties is of the far left, the newly formed Bundeswagenknecht, named after its leader, Sarah Wagenknecht. Wagenknecht's background is of the East German variety, while it was under the thumb of the Soviet Union and behind the Iron Curtain. She did not want the Soviets' East German project to end in 1989. At the time when the Berlin Wall fell, when most East Germans were visiting West Germany and thinking of reunification, Wagenknecht went the other way and actually joined the East German Socialist Unity Party. Today, Wagenknecht's personal political party represents a left-wing nationalism that is unique. Her economics are of the left, while she shares common ground with the right on migration policy and skepticism of the European Union. And she never left the Soviet influence behind, hanging on to her East German Russia curious disposition by blaming NATO for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, advocating negotiations with Putin to end the war, regardless of whether Putin wants such things, and the immediate end to weapons deliveries to Ukraine in order to pressure Zelensky to cede territory. As you might expect then, Wagenknecht enjoys outside popularity in former East Germany, where her new party jumped to 16% support in September 2024 Thüringen state elections. By the way, the party that won the most votes in that former East German state election, the Alternative for Deutschland, Alternative for Germany. The AfD was led there by Björn Höcke, who is the closest German politician to an old-school National Socialist. And I don't say that lightly. He intentionally advocates a, quote, 180-degree turnaround in the way Germans practice remembrance of the years of fascism. In 2021, he was fined for using an NSDAP slogan, All for Germany, Alles für Deutschland. At the national level, the Alternative for Germany was designated by the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution as extremist. The AfD became popular for its opposition to Merkel's refugee policies. Today, the anti-asylum message has expanded to be generally anti-migrant. Like the BSV under Sarah Wagenknecht, the AfD are critical of the European Union, and like Wagenknecht, they oppose Western exports to Ukraine, advocating unilateral cancellation of energy sanctions by reinitiating Russian gas imports. Their voters actually have a more favorable view of Vladimir Putin than President Zelensky. As of the writing of this video, the AfD is polling better nationally than ever before, a strong second place. Their 18 to 20% support has been consistent for months and is more likely to be a floor than a ceiling. So how does Germany emerge from this government collapse and rising extremism? Well, as I said before, it is possible that the main opposition, the CDU, wins a large plurality in the elections and forms a two-party coalition with a junior partner. Hey, traditional stuff. But the only problem is, as of the writing of this video, none of the potential junior partners are polling well enough to bring Merz's CDU a majority in the Bundestag. Therefore, another realistic option is that Merz and the CDU get the most votes, but need two junior partners to form a governing coalition. That would mean another three-party coalition, which we've learned poses many challenges. One option we dare not ignore, the Alternative for Germany surges. The day it was announced Trump was re-elected, the AfD's chancellor candidate, Alice Weidel, seemed downright giddy, calling him a role model. It's clear they see Trump's success as an example that might boost their electoral prospects. And I keep using this word, that's possible. Also possible the collapse of the German government in the wake of Trump's re-election focuses minds in a country where only 11% of those polled preferred Donald Trump winning that election over Harris. The short-term results for Germany's mainstream coalition partners and the implications for the long-term health of Germany's democracy will be known Sunday, February 23rd. In the meantime, I've uploaded my expanded thoughts on Germany's situation and the implications for world democracy in the wake of Trump's re-election on my brand new Substack. Follow me at William C. Fox on Substack or click the link in the description. Heads held high. Happy Warriors. Later, y'all.